Welcome to the Quiet Chronicle. Tonight, we travel back in time to a moment when the world held its breath and one woman's courage softened the edges of unthinkable tragedy. A story of gentleness in chaos, of compassion that rose higher than floodwaters, and of a quiet strength that changed the course of history. The woman at the center of this story is someone you may have heard of, but not like this. Her name was Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, nurse, teacher, humanitarian. A woman often described as the angel of the battlefield, but tonight we won't begin on any battlefield. We begin in a quiet valley, green, soft, peaceful, in the early summer of 1889. A valley that had no idea a storm was coming. A valley that went to sleep under gentle rain and woke up to a wall of water. This is the beginning of the Johnstown Flood, and this is the beginning of how Clara Barton saved hundreds of lives, including children, infants, and the families who had nowhere else to turn. So, settle in, let your breathing soften, and drift with me to the quiet before the storm. In the spring of 1889, the valley around Johnstown, Pennsylvania, looked like something out of a painting. Rolling hills covered in shades of deep green, houses dotted along the edges of streams, children playing in the unpaved streets, laundry fluttering on lines between porches. A peaceful, ordinary American town. Above the valley, tucked high in the Allegheny Mountains, sat Lake Conemaugh, a man-made lake held in place by the South Fork Dam. It had once been a reservoir for the Pennsylvania Canal system, but was later converted into a private retreat for wealthy industrialists, complete with a clubhouse, fishing docks, and elegant summer houses. Down below, life followed a gentle rhythm. Coal miners walked home with dust still in their hair. Mothers prepared dinner over cast iron stoves. Factory whistles echoed through the valley at dawn and dusk, and the river, the Little Conemaugh, shimmered softly as it wound between houses. Most people had lived their whole lives under the shadow of the dam. Few thought about it, and almost no one feared it. But in late May of 1889, the sky began to change. The air thickened. Clouds gathered, heavy and dark, and rain, steady at first, began to fall. No one worried. It was spring. Rain was normal. Valleys and rivers welcomed it. But this rain did not stop. By the second day, the river swelled. By the third, the lake above the valley rose higher than it had in years. By the fourth, engineers were scrambling, racing time, racing water, racing the weight of decisions made long ago. And on May 31st, the sky opened completely. Rain fell in sheets, heavy and endless, like the heavens had cracked. The valley slept uneasily that night. Some people noticed the sound of rushing water in the distance. Others saw small streams turning into rivers, but no one could have imagined the truth, that the dam, miles above them, was beginning to tremble. And in a few hours, the valley would no longer be a valley, but a bowl filled with water. While the valley struggled beneath the rain, Clara Barton was far away, in Washington, D.C., sitting at a wooden desk covered in papers, letters, and maps. She was nearly 70 years old, but still moved with the sharp, quiet purpose of a woman half her age. Her life had been a tapestry of courage. She had walked among the wounded at Antietam. She had tended to soldiers in muddy trenches. She had brought food, blankets, and hope where governments failed to reach. By 1889, she had founded the American Red Cross, a young organization inspired by the international movement in Europe. She wanted the Red Cross to respond not only to war, but to disaster, storms, fires, floods. But America had not yet faced a disaster large enough to call them. Then came the rain and the telegrams. The first message was vague, heavy storms flooding possible. The second was grim, South Fork Dam in danger, towns at risk. The third, Clara paused when she read it, Words smudged by the speed of the operator. Dam may fail. Thousands in valley requesting assistance. Clara set the paper down. The room felt suddenly quiet, still. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the weight of the moment. Then she stood, calm, decisive, certain. "Prepare the wagons," she said. "Gather blankets, medicines, food, tools, lanterns, everything we can bring." The Red Cross volunteers moved with practiced rhythm. Some packed crates of bread and dried meats. Others sorted bandages and quinine bottles. Still others loaded blankets, hundreds of them, folded with care. Clara oversaw it all, her lantern casting soft gold across the floor. Outside, rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. She didn't know yet what awaited her. She didn't know how many lives she would meet, or how many she would save. But Clara Barton had always believed that human suffering was a call, and that every call must have an answer. And so, before dawn, she began the journey west, toward the valley, toward the storm, toward the flood that had not yet come up in the mountains above Johnstown. The South Fork Dam groaned under the weight of the rising lake. Workers ran back and forth across the spillway, trying desperately to clear debris and widen the overflow channels. But the water rose faster than they could shovel logs, branches, tree trunks. Even pieces of fencing floated toward the spillway like offerings to a restless sea. By mid-morning, the lake was pressing so hard against the dam wall that small streams of water began seeping through cracks in the earth. A foreman swore under his breath. Men shouted orders. Shovels dug. Axes split wood. But nothing eased the pressure. The lake was no longer calm. Its surface churned like a creature pacing in a cage. People in the valley reported hearing a distant thunder, a sound that didn't match the sky. A deep, heavy rumble. No one knew it was the dam. No one knew that the soil was loosening. No one knew the water was carving its way through the earth, grain by grain, inch by inch. By early afternoon, engineers realized the truth: the dam could not be saved. A messenger rode his horse down the valley, shouting warnings. The dam is going to break." Some listened. Some ignored him. Some laughed, thinking he was drunk or foolish. Johnstown had survived floods before. The dam had held through storms stronger than this. What was different now was invisible. The water had eaten through the base of the dam, and finally, at 3:10 in the afternoon, the dam gave way. Not slowly, not in pieces, but all at once. A wall of water, 60 feet high, half a mile wide, charged down the mountain with the force of a runaway train, carrying trees, horses, railroad cars, and entire houses ripped from their foundations. The valley had minutes, only minutes. Children playing by the window, families preparing dinner, mothers holding newborns. None of them knew that the world had already changed, and that the flood was coming. The flood reached the valley faster than anyone could have imagined. It did not sound like water at first. It sounded like mountains collapsing, like 1,000 trains roaring at once, like the earth itself splitting open. Families stepped outside their doors, confused by the noise, the shaking, the strange stillness that came just before the impact. And then the wall of water arrived. It crashed into the first houses with a force no human could withstand. Wood shattered like matchsticks. Bridges folded like they were made of paper. Entire buildings lifted and spun, carried as easily as leaves down a river. The water was not clean. It was black with mud, with uprooted trees, with timbers from shattered barns, and with debris from everything the valley once held dear. In Johnstown, children screamed as the wave turned corners, following streets like a living thing. Mothers grabbed babies, clutching them close, praying for strength that no human could logically hope to find. People climbed into attics, onto rooftops, onto floating wreckage, anything that might keep them above the swirling darkness below. One woman later described it as a sea with teeth. The water did not stop in one surge. It kept coming, pushing deeper into the valley, rising higher, swallowing everything. But miracles appeared too. A family trapped inside a collapsing house found themselves lifted, gently, by a floating boxcar that carried them to safety miles downstream. A young boy, separated from everyone he loved, clung to a wooden door that somehow remained upright through the entire journey. A baby, no more than 6 months old, was found later wrapped in a quilt, asleep in a kitchen drawer that had turned into a tiny boat. All of this happened in minutes. By the time the main wave settled, the valley was unrecognizable. Entire streets were gone. Fields were covered in wreckage. Railroad tracks twisted like ribbons. Families separated, some alive, some missing, some silently waiting to be found. And as dusk fell, the survivors, wet, shivering, terrified, looked out over the ruined valley and realized something chilling. Help was far away. But night was already here. Clara Barton was halfway to Pennsylvania when the final telegram reached her. The operator handed her the sealed envelope. She opened it in the dim light of the train carriage. The message was short, unthinkably short. Johnstown destroyed, thousands dead. Immediate assistance needed. Clara closed her eyes. Around her, the train rattled softly along the tracks, carrying crates of blankets, medical supplies, clothing, lanterns, food, and dozens of volunteers who had no idea what awaited them. Clara whispered, almost to herself, "We will go to them." She knew this was more than a disaster. It was the disaster that would define the American Red Cross. And she felt something else too, a heaviness behind her ribs, a quiet ache, because she understood that many of the injured, many of the missing, would be children. Babies pulled from broken homes, young girls found shivering in tree branches, teenage boys who had tried to save their families. Clara had seen war, she had seen suffering, but this, a town erased in minutes, that was different. The train chugged northward through the night. Rain tapped steadily on the windows, syncing with the rhythm of the wheels. Volunteers slept in their seats, unaware of the valley of mud and grief that waited ahead. Clara did not sleep. She kept the lantern burning beside her. She kept her hands folded quietly in her lap, and she kept her mind focused, calm, unwavering. If Johnstown was destroyed, then she would build a new Johnstown. If children were lost, she would find them. If families were separated, she would reunite them. If the living lacked hope, she would bring it to them. To Clara, suffering was never just a tragedy. It was a summons, and she always answered. When Clara's train finally stopped near Johnstown, it was early morning. Fog hovered over the valley, thick and gray, like a shroud. Her volunteers stepped down onto the muddy ground in silence. Then Clara stepped forward, and she saw it. The valley was gone. Trees lay snapped like twigs. Telegraph poles stuck sideways in the earth. Whole locomotives sat overturned, half buried in mud. Roofs floated upside down, with rocking chairs still perched eerily on top. A horse cart was lodged in the branches of a sycamore tree, 20 feet in the air. And everywhere, in every direction, was wreckage. Broken wood, clothes tangled in branches, dolls, books, blankets, shoes, photographs, memory after memory scattered like fallen leaves. Clara covered her mouth softly with her hand. The other volunteers stood behind her, speechless. A man walked toward them, mud up to his knees, face hollow, eyes unfocused. He whispered, Are you here to help?" Clara's voice came out steady, warm, certain. "Yes," she said. "We are here now." The man nodded once, as if the words had unlocked something inside him. He stumbled forward and pointed toward a pile of debris. "There are people," he said. "There are children." Clara signaled her volunteers. Within seconds, they moved, forming lines, setting up triage areas, passing out clean water and clearing rubble with bare hands. Clara walked through the ruins, lantern in hand, her skirt brushing against splinters and mud. Everywhere she looked, she saw need, raw, overwhelming need. A small girl sat alone on a piece of drifted wood, clutching a wet ribbon to her chest. Clara knelt beside her. "What is your name, dear?" The girl did not speak. She only opened her hand. Inside was a tiny shoe, a baby's shoe. Clara's breath trembled for just a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of all the hearts that had broken here. Then she placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "You're safe now," Clara whispered. "We'll take care of you." Clara knew she could not undo the flood, but she could ease the suffering it left behind. And as she moved through the broken valley, lantern light catching on the fog, she made a silent promise. Every child she could save, she would save. Every family she could comfort, she would comfort. Every newborn she could shelter, she would shelter. The flood had taken so much, but Clara Barton had come to return something. Hope. Clara moved through the wreckage with slow, deliberate steps, her lantern glowing softly in the fog behind her. Red Cross volunteers worked in steady rhythm, lifting beams, clearing pathways, setting up tents, boiling water, gathering blankets. The valley was still quiet, as if the flood had stolen the sound from the world. Then, somewhere beyond a broken fence line, Clara heard it. A cry, faint, high, almost lost in the wind. She motioned silently to two volunteers and followed the sound. It grew clearer, sharper, more urgent. They found the source beneath a collapsed porch, half buried under branches and pieces of roof. A little boy no older than 3 wedged between 2 beams. His tiny hands reached upward, trembling, his face streaked with mud. Clara knelt and whispered softly, "It's all right. We're here now." The boy's eyes flicked toward her lantern. He blinked once, twice, and then reached for her. The volunteers gently lifted the beams. Clara wrapped the boy in her own shawl, warm from her body. She held him close, rocking him slowly, her voice barely above a breath. "You're safe. You're safe now," the child whimpered into her shoulder. A woman approached, stumbling over broken boards, her dress torn, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with terror. "Matthew!" she cried out. "Matthew!" The little boy jerked up in Clara's arms. He turned toward the voice, and then reached with both hands. The mother fell to her knees, sobbing with relief. Clara handed the child to her gently, as though passing a dream back to reality. There were hundreds of moments like that. Children reunited with their parents. Children found alone, but saved. Children lifted from roofs and tree branches and floating debris. But sometimes the children had no one to run to. A girl of about 7 sat on a shattered door, her feet dangling above the mud. Clara approached her slowly, offering her a small cup of warm broth. "What is your name?" Clara asked softly. The girl paused, staring at the steam rising from the cup. "Lydia," she said. "Do you know where your family is?" Lydia shook her head once. Water took them. Clara felt her heart fold inward, the ache almost unbearable. But she did not cry. Children needed steadiness, not sorrow. She placed a blanket around Lydia's shoulders. "You stay with us now," Clara whispered. "We'll find a safe place for you. You are not alone." The girl leaned gently against her. Clara led her. There, in the ruins of the valley, Clara Barton became something more than a leader. She became a mother to every child who had lost theirs. As the fog lifted slightly, the volunteers began clearing larger piles of debris. Word spread quickly. Someone had heard crying coming from inside what used to be a small farmhouse. Clara hurried to the site. The house was unrecognizable, flattened like paper pressed under a book. Wooden beams crossed over each other in jagged patterns, twisted by the force of water. But beneath all of it, a sound rose. A cry, then another, soft but insistent. Clara's breath caught. "2 of them," a volunteer said. "Maybe more." Clara knelt, placing her ear close to a gap between planks. The crying was unmistakable. Infants, she whispered. "They're very small." The volunteers began removing debris carefully. Piece by piece, Clara guided them. "Slowly. Do not shake the boards. Easy. Easy." The cries grew louder as daylight touched a small pocket of space between fallen walls. And then the volunteers froze. Inside the tiny void were two babies, twins, wrapped together in a quilt soaked through with mud. The quilt had caught on a nail, keeping them just above the mud line. Their faces were pink with effort, their fists clenched tightly in the air. Clara reached in with steady, practiced hands. "Hello, little ones," she whispered, her voice calm as moonlight. "You've waited long enough." She lifted them close against her chest, letting her body heat warm them. A young volunteer stood beside her, eyes wide. "Ma'am, how did they survive that?" Clara exhaled slowly. "Because someone loved them enough to wrap them well," she said, "and because today was not the day the world would let them go." They brought the babies to the Red Cross tent, now filling with children, parents, widows, and families searching desperately for one another. The tent glowed from within like a lantern in the fog. Clara prepared a station for infants, warm blankets, clean cloths, boiled water, a little corner shielded from the cold wind. She held one of the twins while a volunteer warmed a bottle of milk over a lantern flame. The baby rooted weakly, his mouth searching. Clara placed the bottle gently between his tiny lips. "There you go," she whispered. "You're safe, drink slowly." The baby suckled, fragile but determined. Clara looked at the small miracle in her arms. She knew this valley had seen unimaginable loss, but the survival of these children was a reminder that hope did not wash away. Nearby, a volunteer asked, "Miss Barton, what do we do when we find children with no families?" Clara did not hesitate. "We care for them," she said softly. "We carry them through this night and the next, until someone who loves them comes. And if no one does, then we love them." Her voice never wavered. Later, she would write in her journal, "I have held more babies today than in all my years before." The Red Cross relief camp grew by the hour. What began as a single tent became a cluster of canvas shelters, then small wooden platforms, then makeshift kitchens, laundry lines, and a central fire where volunteers warmed their hands in the cool mountain air. Clara worked tirelessly but gently, her movements calm, deliberate, unhurried. She created something the disaster desperately needed, a place of order in the middle of destruction, a place of warmth in the middle of cold mud, a place of love in the middle of loss. The survivors soon began calling it the Red Cross Village. Clara insisted on something unusual for the time, a special house for children. Not a cold orphanage, not a boarding tent, but a real house, a place with soft blankets, safe cribs, and warm milk. A place where the smallest survivors could sleep without trembling. Volunteers gathered lumber from the wreckage. A carpenter offered his hands. A blacksmith helped bend nails straight so they could be used again. Children watched quietly from the hillside as the house took shape, walls rising, windows placed carefully, a roof angled against the rain. Clara oversaw everything, her quiet voice guiding the work. Make the doors wide. Make the floors smooth. Make the chimney strong. When it was done, she stood in the doorway, hands clasped. It was not large, not perfect, but it was warm inside. She placed the first crib, then the second, then a row of small beds covered with fresh quilts made by volunteers across the state. When the first group of rescued children walked inside, some holding hands, some carried, some blinking in confusion, Clara felt something in her chest loosen. "This house," she whispered, "belongs to all of you." It was the first children's relief home ever created by the American Red Cross. And that night, for the first time since the flood, dozens of little ones slept in safety. The days after the flood blurred into each other like pages in a book softened by rain. From dawn until long past dusk, Clara and her volunteers moved through the ruined valley, searching for the missing. The children who had wandered away, the parents who had been separated, the grandparents who had clung to trees or floating boards through the night. Johnstown seemed to exist in two realities at once. One made of wreckage, splintered houses, broken fences, overturned wagons, and one made of people standing at the edges of ruin, calling out names into the mist. "Sarah! Benjamin! Anna! Can anyone hear me, please?" The mountains echoed their grief back to them. Clara understood something few others did, that disaster was not just destruction, it was disconnection. Families torn apart in seconds. Sons pulled one way, daughters the other. Mothers losing grip on tiny hands in the chaos of the wave. And so she made it her mission to restore what she could. The Red Cross set up a reunion tent, a place where survivors came every hour to ask, "Has anyone seen my wife? My mother? My little boy with the red boots? My baby girl?" Clara sat at the center table, writing careful descriptions in her neat, round handwriting. Boy, age 9. Light hair, missing since Friday. Woman, 40, last seen carrying an infant. Twin babies, quilted blanket rescued by Red Cross. Every time someone entered the tent, hope flickered like a lantern inside the room. Every time someone left without news, the air dimmed a little. But there were reunions too. A young woman, cheeks streaked with dirt, arrived shaking, praying that her daughter was alive. A volunteer guided her to the back of the tent. And there the mother fell to her knees, sobbing, as a little girl with braids ran into her arms. A teenage boy found his younger brother after 2 days apart. They held each other without speaking, their relief louder than any words. Every reunion added a thread of warmth back into the valley. Clara watched each one with quiet gratitude. She could not erase the flood, but she could help mend what it had broken, and to her, that was sacred work. Amid the reunions came another wave, the wounded. Not all injuries were visible. Many were carried in hearts, in tremors, in the faraway look in a survivor's eyes. But many injuries were physical too. Broken ribs, deep cuts from splintered wood, bruises across entire limbs, hypothermia, infection beginning to set in, and the quiet exhaustion of people who had not slept in days. Clara moved through the medical tent as if she had been born for it. Her voice soft but firm. "More clean water here. Wrap that wound again. Tighter but gentle. Keep this one warm. She's shaking too much. Give him broth slowly." A young man was brought in, unconscious, his pulse thready, his breathing uneven. Clara placed a hand on his forehead, warm with fever, and whispered, "You did not survive the waters to leave us now. Stay with us." She cooled his skin with cloth dipped in river water filtered through boiled linen. She encouraged his lungs with gentle pressure, timed with each breath. She oversaw the cleaning of his wounds, the splinting of his leg, the careful feeding of broth through parted lips. 3 days later, he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Clara's face, halfway lit by a lantern, calm and steady. "You're safe," she said. He nodded, tears forming, though he didn't know why Clara stayed by dozens of bedsides like that. Through fevers, through nightmares, through cries in the night as survivors relived the moment the water swallowed their world. Some screamed, some wept silently, some called out names of those who would never answer again. Clara never left them alone. She sat with a widow as she held her newborn son, the only family she had left. She held an old man's hand as he mourned quietly, staring at the remains of his home. She comforted a mother who kept asking, "Why did the river take my girls and leave me here?" Clara did not try to give her answers. She simply said, "I will sit with you until the grief grows lighter." And somehow, it did. Because compassion, when shared, becomes a kind of medicine. And Clara Barton carried it in endless supply. The Red Cross village grew into something almost astonishing, a place of life rebuilding itself amid ruin. Tents expanded into kitchens and laundry stations. A carpentry tent produced stools, cradles, beds, and tables. Women who had lost everything learned to sew again, stitching donated fabric into warm quilts. At night, the Red Cross village glowed with lanterns, dozens of tiny suns floating in the fog. Parents tucked children into beds inside the newly built relief houses. Volunteers shared stories over fires. The sound of tools being put away mingled with soft humming from mothers trying to lull infants to sleep. One evening, a volunteer approached Clara with a small wooden toy, a little carved boat shaped from flood debris. "A boy made this," the volunteer said. "He wanted you to have it." Clara took the tiny boat into her hands. She traced the smooth lines with her thumb. "Tell him," she said softly, "that his gift will stay with me." Later, she placed it beside her bed inside the supply wagon, a reminder of the valley's strength, a reminder of the children whose lives would grow beyond this tragedy, a reminder that even in ruin, beauty persisted. By the end of the second week, the Red Cross village no longer looked like a camp. It looked like a community, a fragile one, yes, but a living one. And Clara Barton, with her steady lantern glow, had become its quiet guardian. By the third week after the flood, something subtle began to change in Johnstown. The mud dried into soft, cracked patterns across the valley floor. The air, once heavy with the scent of debris, lightened. A few green shoots pushed bravely through the broken earth, small signs of a world trying to begin again. Children played outside the Red Cross houses, their laughter returning in cautious, hopeful bursts. Their games still carried shadows of the flood, building boats from scraps of wood or drawing ripples in the mud. But laughter was laughter, and it brought warmth back into the valley. Families rebuilt one room at a time. Men carried lumber on their shoulders, each step heavy but determined. Women swept mud from doorways, hung fresh blankets in windows, planted small gardens beside their tents. And every morning, Clara Barton walked the length of the village with her lantern in hand, though she no longer needed the light. The lantern had become a symbol now, a gentle promise. You are not alone. One morning, as she checked on the children's house, a little boy tugged at her skirt. He held out a tiny flower, a yellow wildflower that had somehow survived beneath the wreckage. "For you," he said shyly. Clara took it, touched beyond words, and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. Hope, she thought, always finds a way to bloom. The two infant twins rescued from beneath the collapsed farmhouse had become symbols of survival throughout the valley. They slept peacefully in side-by-side cribs inside the children's house, swaddled in soft quilts. Their tiny fingers curled around Clara's whenever she checked on them. Their breathing, slow and delicate, calmed even the most restless volunteers. But Clara knew they needed more than safety. They needed a family, and so she put out a quiet call through the valley. Any mother with love to give, come meet the little ones. Families who had lost their own children came hesitantly, afraid of hope, afraid of heartbreak. But the moment they saw the babies, something inside them softened. One woman, who had lost her newborn son the night of the flood, brushed tears from her cheeks as she held one of the twins against her chest. "He feels like a heartbeat I thought I'd never hear again," she whispered. Another couple came, hands trembling, unsure if they deserved joy after surviving when so many others had not. Clara placed the second baby into their arms. "He doesn't ask where you came from," she said gently. "He only asks if you'll stay." By the end of the week, both babies had families. Their new parents wrapped them in fresh quilts and carried them home along the newly cleared roads. Clara watched them go with a quiet smile. They were the valley's smallest survivors, and now they would grow into futures untouched by the flood's memory. After 6 long weeks of tireless work, the Red Cross village glowed with lantern light one last time. Food simmered in iron pots. Children played near the fires. Families shared stories of survival and loss, but also of resilience. Volunteers packed the final crates of supplies, knowing the valley could now stand on its own feet. Clara stood on a small rise overlooking the camp. From there, she could see everything: the rebuilt homes, the relief houses, the children's yard, the river, now calm and steady, and the mountains bathed in the soft lavender light of dusk. She felt the exhaustion settle into her bones, but also something else: peace. A quiet gratitude. She had given everything she had: her strength, her tenderness, her sleepless nights, her calm hands, her steady presence. And in return, the valley had given her a gift she never expected. It had shown her that even in devastation, humanity rises, not loudly, not suddenly, but softly, like dawn. Behind her, she heard footsteps. It was the carpenter who had helped build the children's house. "Miss Barton," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Clara shook her head gently. "You already have," she said. "Every nail you hammered, every board you lifted, that was your thank you." He swallowed hard, then pointed toward the fire where the children sat. "They're smiling again," he whispered. Clara's eyes softened. "That," she said, "is all I ever hoped for." As the moon rose above the valley, the survivors gathered around Clara. They had no grand speeches prepared, only simple words, spoken from hearts that had been broken and mended. "Thank you, Miss Barton. You saved us. You gave us hope again. You brought our children home." Clara felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since arriving. Not from sorrow, but from the quiet beauty of shared humanity. She bowed her head. "I did not save you," she said softly. "You saved one another. I only helped you see that you could." And the valley, wrapped in the silver glow of moonlight, seemed to nod in agreement. Clara Barton and the Red Cross left Johnstown the following morning, but the valley did not forget her. For decades afterward, survivors told their children and grandchildren about the small woman with the steady hands and the quiet voice. They spoke of how she walked through the ruins as if guided by invisible lantern light, how she built homes, fed the hungry, comforted the grieving, and saved the smallest, weakest lives with more love than seemed possible. Historians later wrote that Clara Barton had saved hundreds, but the people of Johnstown would say she saved thousands, not just with medicine or blankets or food, but with dignity. Before she left, Clara recorded her final journal entry from the valley. "Where there has been suffering, let there now be peace. Where there has been loss, let there now be life. The valley will rise again." And it did. Homes were rebuilt. Families grew. Children who had been rescued learned to walk, then run, then chase dreams beyond anything the flood had once threatened to steal. The Red Cross became a symbol of hope across the United States, responding to fires, hurricanes, earthquakes, wars, and always carrying a bit of Clara's quiet strength with them. Today, more than a century later, people still travel to Johnstown. They walk the memorial grounds. They read the stories carved into stone. And somewhere, deep in the valley, when the fog rolls just right, you can almost imagine a lantern glowing softly through the mist, a reminder of the woman who came when the world fell apart, a reminder of the hands that held children through the darkest night, a reminder of the light that never went out. Thank you for listening to the Quiet Chronicle. Tonight, we remembered a woman whose compassion outshone disaster and whose gentleness saved a valley. May this story remind you that even in the darkest moments, human kindness glows like a lantern in the fog. Sleep well, and until the next quiet story.